Hey everybody, welcome back. So, in the first couple of episodes, we talked about how to get your mesh into Unreal, how to set up some animations, some emotes, and a simple combo attack system with a few button presses. Now, I want to talk about what if that sword wasn't in your hand and you needed to pick it up from the world and then use it? How do we set that up from its core foundation before we jump into the more advanced techniques later on in the series? Well, let's see how we do that. First, let's demonstrate what I have so far. So what I have so far is we have the character. And as you can see here, I was able to add another emote, which is the kick, which we'll cover later. I was able to add a sword to the world, which is not in my hand no more. And when I press the shift key, she goes down, pick up the actual sword, and now I can use the sword to attack. Okay, and if we were to restart that and I were to go back, as you can see, I cannot attack with that button, but I can still do the kick, which is completely different. All right, so let's go into how we actually put this sword on the world. We're going to go ahead and use another sword. We have a sword that I purchased off of CG Trader, or I think this one might have been free off of CG Trader. You can just go ahead and type in sword, and you have a selection of options there. The first thing I want to do is right click on the folder, the content drawer, and then I want to go ahead and go to blueprint class, and I want to create another actor. And then I want to name this one BP underscore sword, and then we'll say number 2. All right, because we already have that first one. And then we're going to go ahead and go into that sword. And the first thing that we want to do is set up how sword 2 is going to look. So let's bring that down. Let's open that up. We want to first add a static mesh in, which is going to be where the sword is going to be held. And we want to add a collision because this is how the player is going to interact with the sword once they collide. Go ahead and add a spirit collision. We'll say we'll say connected for now, and I'll explain more to why that says connected. And then for the static mesh, we'll call it sword 2, just for simplicity. And then we will go ahead and select the sword that we were looking at a second ago. So we'll go ahead down to the folder, click on the sword, and then we'll drag it in. And then we'll take the sword and drag it up. We'll take the collision and drag it to the middle of the sword. And then we will increase the collision to about 55 maybe. I think 55 is good. Ooh, don't want to move it like that. 55 is good. We'll move it up 1. Okay, perfect. Okay, and we'll also turn the sword around. Although we can do that in the actual world, it'd probably be better to do it here. We can lower the height back down to 50. What happens if I turn that back down to 0? Put that to 0, and I think that's the only thing that's rotated. Perfect. Okay, so as simple as that is, if we go back out of this and go to the third person map, we now have a sword that is ready to go into the world as a static mesh built in a blueprint actor. And if I go ahead and press play, we can just see that that sword is now there. At the current moment, we can't do anything with this sword. We can't pick it up, we can't touch it. What we're going to do now is set up an interface. I already created an interface called item pickup interface, but typically what you want to do is open the interface up after you create it, and you want to create it by right clicking on the content drawer. You want to go to blueprint, and you want to go to blueprint interface. This is going to allow you to rename the interface that was created. Once it's opened up, you're going to have a section where it says details, and you're going to have a section that says add and functions. You want to click on add. You want to add the initial function that you want the interface to actually do over and over again. And in this case, we just want this interface to be a take item interface, which will be used through any item that we attach this interface to. And how do we attach the interface? So we're going to go back to that blueprint sword 2. And then we're going to go over the class settings, and we're going to go to add implemented interfaces, and we're going to look for that interface that I created, which is item pickup. And as you can see now on the left hand side, the interface is now added to this particular actor. We haven't added any function to it yet, but once we do add the function to it, this will allow the actor to interact with this weapon, any weapon that's on the field. So both swords actually. And now that I'm adding a second sword, we have to go a little deeper into the setup to make sure that the player knows what sword is being picked up at that moment. Which we could probably just put an integer and say sword 1 or sword 2, but once again, that's more complex. That's something we want to do later down the line. For now, what we're going to do is go to the third person character. For this training, I created another third person character called BP third base. And in BP third base, we're going to open up. And I already have the functions here for everything to work. I have the attack and I have the emote. We want to add another input called pick up, because this is what we're going to initially use to start the interaction with the item in the world. So the first thing you want to do, just like before with the emote, is you want to go up to edit, you want to go to project settings, and then you want to go down to input. Once you're in input, you want to add the pickup, and you want to add the button you want to select it with. Right now I use left shift. You can also go ahead and add a kick and add that to a button. Also, I added to the right mouse button. I'll go later into details to why we should add a kick or punch, whatever you want to do. But go ahead and add that in now. We'll come back to that a little bit later to why we have that in. But once we have everything set up, we want to go back to the blueprint. We want to type in pickup. Now we're going to have the input for pickup set up. And then the first thing we want to do is add a do once node. The reason why we want to add a do once node is I've learned that when you do animations, or if you add animatage to anything, you don't want the animatage to spam itself, and you don't want to consistently have somebody press a button over and over again. Somebody might be frustrated and want to pick up a sword fast. You don't want that person to press it over and over again and have the animation run. So we go ahead and pick the do once, and then just like before, we want to copy similar to what's up here, right? So we want to add a movement mode. Okay. And then that's going to be the same. We want to say none. This way we can stop. And then we want to add a play admin montage. I'm not going to go over the whole concept of how to add a play admin montage, but for the most part, I went to Mixamo again, and I found a animation that would work for this particular item pickup. And then I was able to put that into the system, set a few keyframes to make it smoother. And now we have a item pickup animation, which I'll go ahead and open that right now. Okay, and we already had set this animation pickup up to the character. So as you can see here, we already have it all set up. So we're gonna go ahead and select that one for what's gonna go into the anim montage. And there we go. So once that's in the anim montage now, we can already go ahead and check to see how this looks. So right now, so now that we're here, when I press the button, the character will go down and the character won't move until after the animation is done, and then the character will be able to move again. So let's go ahead and continue. All right, now that we're back in the blueprint, we see that we have play admin montage. So now what we want to do is add a slight delay. Now this delay was already pre-calculated because I set it up, and pretty much because we don't have a complete system intact at the moment to tell the character where the item is at, how to place the hand on the item, and how to interact with the item once the hand is at that point, we're going to take a crucial shortcut by looking at the pacing and timing of the animation based on the interaction point to when the item should be picked up on the ground. And I'll explain that a little bit more once I show you how I set that up. So right now we're going to go for a safe zone at 1.3 seconds, right? And then what we want to do is we want to set get overlapping actors. So remember, we set a collision on the sword. When the player collides with the sword, we're going to set a for each loop and a get overlapping actors so that the player and sword know that they're connected. So what we're going to do is do a for each loop. And then we're going to get overlapping actor. And also this right here, we per blueprint, we can change this up so that it knows what actors should be overlapping. So right now on the original sword you see me pick up, I have it set to nothing. This is just the overlapping actor itself. If we set the class filter to find a specific class, every actor on the field will have its own class. So when the player is within that field, it will know what particular weapon to pick up. Now, for simple game development tip is you don't want to have items that shouldn't be overlapping unless their collision boxes are extremely small. So even though they're close to each other, the items won't be picked up. You can also put tags on items so that the player knows which item is closest to him so that they can pick up. You can go really deep with this stuff, but we'll keep it straightforward right now. We'll keep it at get overlapping actors for right now. We'll change that a little bit later. An array element, we want to make sure it does object implement interface. So this goes back to the interface that we set up earlier. This also allows you to fine tune what should be picked up, what shouldn't be picked up, or what type of interaction should happen, because if you have a different interface, different interfaces will act differently depending on the circumstances. And if it does, for instance, have the interface, we're going to go to a branch as the condition, and then we're going to set loop body as that connector point there. Let's move this down for some more space so we don't have it too close to the above blueprint code. We'll move this down. Okay. So now what we're going to do is on completed, we're going to add a delay. And the reason why I did this is because I've learned that when I first set everything up, I did not have an ability to start moving again if the character didn't pick up an item. And you'll see why, because right here, this right here goes forward only if the item has an interface. If the item doesn't have an interface, there's nothing down at the bottom to actually have the character start moving again. So what we're going to do is we're going to set another set movement mode. And then we're going to set to now walking. And this is if it's completed and it hits false. Okay. And this is only going to happen after the montage is completed. Now, I was going to further fine tune that to stop the end montage if it doesn't find an interface. We could do that in a later series once we go back to fine tune and polish all of the code and structure here. Okay, and like always, I'm going to go ahead and go over all of this so we will have a better idea of how this works. Now, from the array element, which is going to show that interface, we want to go ahead and drag out the take item, which is built into the interface, and we want to set it into true. So now, if the item that's on the ground has the interface intact, once we collide, if that's all true, we'll go ahead and take the item. And what does it mean to take the item? Well, we're going to get to that in a second too. Let's finish up the code here. Okay, so that's interesting. And now I figured out an easier way to set something up. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another delay here. This delay gives a buffer between the thought of what happens to the static mesh in the player's hand and what happens to the static mesh on the ground. This is a little, I want to say, technique here that I'm using to kind of add in a seamless transition in between when the item leaves the ground and enters the player's hand. Once again, like I said earlier, because we're not going the full depth of adding a line trace and where the player hand should interact with the actual static mesh when picking it up, we're going to be taking a step back. Now, when we get to IK movement and procedural movement with match motion, that's going to be a whole nother concept. So as of for right now, we don't need to be 0.2 milliseconds. We could do 0.15. And the concept of this is to set the static mesh. And if you guys remember earlier, in the old video, we had set a static mesh here for the weapon and the character, which as of right now, we had disabled the sword that was in the character's hand because we want to pick this item up. So by disabling that sword and then putting it down into the event graph, we can go ahead and say we want that weapon that we pick up to be set right here. Oh, which I already have it connected, so that's good too. Perfect. And what do we want to have be placed in our hand? Well, we want the new sword mesh that we created. Okay, so this works out. Now remember, this is only going to appear in the player's hand if we overlap the actor that has the implemented interface. And that's what this is right here. So let's go over this code structure really quickly. When we press the button, which is just a do once, which we need to connect that, it's going to stop the player's movement almost automatically. We're going to introduce the play admin montage, which the character is going to go ahead and start picking up the item. We're going to delay when the actual item starts to get picked up for 1 second and 3 milliseconds. After finding that item with the interface, we're going to go ahead and set that sword that should be in the player's hand. For instance, now, this would have to get changed if the outputting mesh was set to be a specific filter. If it was set to be a specific filter, what will end up happening is this item that will appear in the player's hand will be dependent on whatever overlapping actor is actually being overlapped at the moment. So we have this set up. Right now, nothing's going to happen. So I think if we go ahead and go back to the game, you'll see if I go ahead to pick something up, nothing will be in the player's hand, but I will be able to move around after that. And because we didn't finish setting up everything here, as you can see what happens here, the original sword gets placed in the hand because the interface is still implemented within this sword, but what we need for it to be this sword isn't implemented yet. So let's go ahead and change that. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go to the BP sword 2, and now we're gonna give some functionality in BP sword 2. So this sword destroys itself once it's being picked up and then appears in the player's hand. But how do we go about doing that? All right. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we have the take item function here. We're gonna go into take item function. Right now we need to call out what we need, what static mesh we are focusing on to appear to the player's hand once it's destroyed. Okay, so now we need to set up the functionality within this in order to get it to work so that when a player picks up the item, it actually appears in their hand. So what we want to do is set up a custom event. We're going to call this one sword is in hands. All right, and then from here, we want to make sure that it's going to be casted to the third person's character's hands. In this case, For this demo, we'll use the basic third person so that we can show you directly. And then from here, we'll get player's controller so we can reference the actual character. And from there, we want to cause a delay because we added the delay in the actual blueprint for when the interaction happens for 0.15. Right now, we'll complement that by putting it at 0.2. See, there's a thing about timing. Timing may look like everything is seamless, but sometimes timing isn't as seamless as it looks. So yeah, take that into consideration. And now what we want to do is go back to the third BP base, and we want to make sure that we add in what's called weapon equipped. The reason why we want weapon equipped inside of the BP base is we want to make sure that we are telling the game that the weapon is now equipped, and this goes back in to allow the player to do the combo once the weapon is equipped. So what we'll do here is from the player, we will go to weapon equipped, and we'll set it, not get. So we'll set weapon is equipped. Okay, so what we want to do is set weapon equipped. Alright, and then we're going to pay that as yes. So now, once this is triggered, we're telling the BP blueprint that the weapon is equipped, and then once that happens, we're going to destroy the actor that is on the actual environment. Then within the interface itself, we want to call the custom event that we just did. And the return node is going to be the static mesh, which we named sword2. Okay, so what we want to do is make sure the return node is returning back the static mesh that's within this blueprint to destroy itself. And then now, what we also want to do is make sure that we go to the blueprint and make sure that the combo attack has weapon equipped with a branch node. And what this does is, when we press the button, if we don't have weapon equipped, we will not attack. If we do have weapon equipped, we will attack. And we leave false on nothing so that we can bring that forward. Okay, and now when we go and try to pick the sword up, we will get there we go. And can we use the mighty sword? We can use the sword. And next, we'll talk about dynamic destruction and how, after we have the sword in our hand, how we can go about and destroying all of these things and adding small little changes to the parameters to make everything look different and unique. See you then.